On this edition of What's in a Game, we are going to do another tier list where we're ranking all the teams in the NBA in terms of where they stand in this upcoming season. Welcome to What's in a Game. I'm Will Jones, back from the Telluride Film Festival, so thank you for the long wait before the next episode, and I'm here with Grace Jean as always. How have you been, Grace?
I've been good. I got back home to California after visiting family I guess it's been like a couple of months. Like I basically went to Florida right after I was in Denver, and it was nice to see family, but it's also nice to be back in my own bed.
It's off season, so we're going on trips and seeing family and doing stuff, and we appreciate all the listeners who are like sticking with us and being patient between episodes because I know everyone just wants our content so much because it's so great.
Especially Kevin Durant.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's watching all the time. Yeah, if you haven't subbed, please do, since we're talking about all you guys, and there's I think what like half of people or something are third or not are only subbed, so we need more because we're trying to grow this podcast. And for those who already are, you know we love you. But let's
Yes,
move.
we need you to subscribe so that we can fund Will's lavish lifestyle
Yeah,
of going to film
I
festivals
cannot
and
afford to go to Telluride every year, so let's get this going.
yeah. So before we jump into the news, I just wanted to give a couple of programming notes for the upcoming episodes. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing some shows on the WNBA, actually, because the WNBA playoffs start September 22nd. So it'll be like a nice bridge to carry us through the rest of the off season and NBA preseason before NBA basketball comes back. And we're really excited to have some guests on to give us some more insight into the WNBA.
But we're starting out with some news items, and I was gone, so I'm going to be kind of reacting to this in real time as Grace fills me in on what happened.
The first news item, which actually came with more details this morning. So over the weekend, we found out that Gigi Jackson from the Memphis Grizzlies has actually injured himself. He was playing, I think it was like a pickup game or some offseason run, and he had hurt his foot, needed surgery on it. And I think the news that came down today is either that he's about to get surgery or he had surgery and he's going to be out for 3 or more months. He was actually like the bright spot of the Memphis Grizzlies season last year, in a very, very dark NBA season for a team.
They can't catch a break, really. That's just
Really?
Insane. I feel bad
my
for
first
them.
thought was like, I thought the basketball gods had finished punishing the Memphis Grizzlies, but clearly not. The next bit of news that we got is that Ivica Zubac actually got a 3-year extension with the Los Angeles Clippers. His current deal, he's making about $11 million for this last year. And then every year after that, it's going to be something like about $18.5 million a year for the next 3 years. I was surprised by this extension, not because it happened, but because of the number, as we talked about on the show in earlier episodes about the offseason bigs in the NBA. Pretty much every big that I've seen news about, whether it was like a sign and trade or just an outright signing in free agency, there's a lot of movement in the center market in particular this year. Everyone got overpaid by at least a little bit compared to where I thought they'd be. Whereas Zubac, I think, is the only one that got a little bit less than I thought he would get, right?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done player rankings in particular by position or anything in this show, but when you look at what I would think are not necessarily comparable centers, but okay, this is like a guy who's a bit better, maybe a little bit more consistent, the Jared Allens, the Nick Claxtons of the world, making 25 million a year plus, and now Zubac is one of the few players of his caliber that's going to be making less than 20 million, especially in an environment where the salary cap is going up dramatically next season. I was a little bit surprised by it. So
yeah, you're right that the bigs are getting paid a lot, especially starting bigs. And
yes,
it's a lot of the market dictating that. And Zubac, I think, is good.
he had the highest field goal percentage from floater range last year of any NBA player. Minimum, I think I had it at 50 attempts.
Yeah.
He took less than, say, like a Jokic, who like was
Is
kind of
amazing.
Brunson level in the number of attempts, but it was still a good number, over 150 attempts
Yeah.
last season. So that,
I
and he was one of the best rim protecting bigs in the NBA last year. Is kind of like this math is not mathing for me.
It's definitely good value. That's my first thought. I was like, that's a really good number for him based on what has been going on. So,
Yeah.
I just was like, damn, good for them. They got a good
Yeah.
contract with Zubac. Like, I'm not someone who's super low on him. I think he's a pretty good player. So good for them.
I guess you could say one factor is the fact, like, he wasn't a free agent this summer, right? He signed an
Yeah.
extension with LA. And he could obviously wait till next summer and enter free agency and see like what his market would be. But I think you and I were both a little bit surprised at how hot, let's say, the market for centers was this summer. There's no telling what that would look like a year from now, especially with a bunch of teams that just signed a bunch
Yeah.
of
There's
centers to
where are you going to
multi-year deals,
go?
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So that it seems like timing particular positions is matters so much in free agency now. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting, but good for Zubats. He has some guaranteed money. He's young. He's only 27 years old, and he's just like a solid starting center in the NBA. So good for him. Good for the Clippers. I think that's just a good deal for them. The last sort of off-season signing news item that we've got here is TJ McConnell just signed an extension with the Indiana Pacers. It's 4 years, 45 million, and there's an interesting deal structure to this. It's not fully guaranteed. And when you compare a 4-year deal for a player like, for example, Zeke Naji, it's a less movable deal because of the full guarantee, including like a player option in that last year, all of that. So for TJ McConnell, who is an older player to be fair, but he is like maybe the most reliable backup point guard in the entire NBA. Like everyone around the league like loves this guy. Like, he plays so hard. He is a good passer. He is a good floor general, all of that stuff, right? So first year 10 million, second year 11 million, and this is going to kick in um, after this upcoming season. So to be fair, this deal will run. So he's 30 now. He'll be 31 in that first year. So he's going to be on the latter end of his career by the end of this deal. But the last 2 years, the third year is a partial guarantee, and then the fourth year is a team option. It's effectively like near expiring money at the end of that deal, which gives the Pacers a ton of flexibility moving forward, and they already have so much. It's been interesting to watch the Pacers in particular maneuver over the last couple of
Yeah.
off seasons under the new CBA, right? And I was watching them like hawks because last year they stole Bruce Brown, right?
I love that contract and that number. And I thought
Mm,
we'd see more players and contracts being in that range with not even the CBA. Like, I was thinking about this before the CBA was introduced, and I was thinking we just have more people in the 11 to like 15
yeah.
range to keep like good teams together, to have more
Mm-mm.
top heavy rosters with middle, range salaries. And so, but, those kinds of people got a lot of money, and then your flexibility is limited because you're paying, your stars so much. And, we were on the brunt of that dynamic, unfortunately. I think it's a really smart contract. Like, I wish we had somebody like that, 11 million for like he's locked up, and then a team option, because we're always giving player options. And yeah, they're gonna have good flexibility. Great move. It's resident favorite of this show. He's drafted on every single draft we ever do. So great for the
He sure is.
Pacers. Like,
I make sure of it. I think Indiana's an interesting comparison team to use because, like, Indianapolis is not a destination city. I think Denver's probably a little bit more of a destination than Indianapolis is, right?
no shade.
Although when you're in the East, like other places are closer, but it's not like these guys are, traveling at their leisure during the season anyway. A fellow former ABA team as well in the Indiana Pacers it's interesting to see how they've maneuvered in contrast to the Nuggets and, very different timelines that these two teams are on, right? Their best player is, I think, 22, maybe going on 23 right now in Tyrese Halliburton. So they haven't had to make these like huge swing for the fences moves, but they were able to like maintain their flexibility, jump when the opportunity presented itself on Pascal Siakam, um, maneuver quite, I think, adeptly at the under the new CBA rules, and then maintain a competitive team with a bunch of young players. And we've talked about how I think they're probably primed for some consolidation after this season, just in terms of like honing the roster in a particular direction. And we'll talk about the Pacers in our tier list. But I think just like looking at how the front office has maneuvered has been interesting to contrast with the Nuggets. And it always helps when you have your backup point guard already. That just like answers a bunch of questions that you don't necessarily have to deal with. So it's good that they just locked him up and they're like, we're just going to keep him. But they have the option, like you said, these like middle tier contracts, they help keep the team together, but they also give the team in the front office flexibility to change things if they need to, because it's such a tradable
God,
number.
yeah, it's so good. The only one who kind of loses out is maybe that player. Like if TJ McConnell thinks he's worth more money, but I don't know.
I think it's a pretty fair number, to be fair. Like
Yeah,
this isn't the
I think
Zubac
for
situation,
sure.
especially when you consider the latter end of the career. And when you think about the partial guarantee and the team option, there have been players like, let's say the Raptors with Bruce Brown this season, right? They had the team option on him. They weren't able to find a trade. Bruce gets to make that 20 million because the Raptors are like, okay, we'll just pick up the option now and then see if we can find a trade later.
Yeah,
So
which was
just
a
the
good
fact
strategy.
that, you need matching salaries, I think helps these guys that have these like team options and partial guarantees, at least on the margins, because there's always a chance that like they couldn't find a deal for you, but they don't want to just let that effectively expiring money go for nothing. So they'll try to like find something for you the next year. Yeah, just interesting to monitor because we still don't really know all of the different ways that teams are, going to be trying to, just find opportunities, let's say, within the constraints of the new CBA. So the last news item is actually something that hasn't happened yet, and that is there's still been no news of Jamal Murray getting extended. I think it's weird. Like we've talked about this, right?
Yeah, can I ask you really quick?
Yeah.
Because I have been gone and I'm reacting to all this, I obviously didn't see a Jamal announcement. What has been like the discourse of Nuggets fan and media around this? Is it like a lot of concern, or are people kind of just like, well, we're still just kind of waiting?
I think there's been a mild level of concern. I think if as the closer training camp gets, I think the sort of temperature on that will go up. Right now, I've seen a couple of the local media members say they're probably expecting a deal to get done by the end of this week, but they're speculating about that. Like no one has said like sources say like I just expect this to get done. Heard some things like, oh, maybe there are some formalities that they're trying to get out of the way. I don't know, right? All of the big extensions in the NBA happened much, much earlier in this summer for reasons, right? You want to get those out of the way because it's going to determine what next steps your team can take. And one of the things I'm watching with the timing of this deal is the fact that Aaron Gordon is going to be extension eligible starting, I think, September 27th. And I need to double check the terms of that because there are certain players for whom you can get you start your extension eligibility on this date, and it might end when the regular season starts, and then you won't be able to extend them again until the end of the season. So like after the NBA finals, right? I would definitely want Jamal's deal to get done before that date because it means that they have a window that they can use to extend AG. Obviously the closer training camp creeps in, media day creeps in, everyone's going to be getting questions about this. They're going to start preseason. There's going to be all these questions. And it's interesting to think about, well, one, it was pointed out that technically speaking, Jamal could try again to make All NBA and become Supermax eligible for next summer. Not really something that I'm thinking would be one smart on his part, because it's so hard to make All NBA in this NBA. Like Tyrese Maxey had an amazing year last year, probably the kind of year that I would have wanted to see Jamal have in the regular season, and did not make All NBA. Like he was not in the cutoff. He didn't make that cutoff, even with the games played requirements that knocked some other guys out of All NBA eligibility, like the Donovan Mitchells, etc. So I just think it doesn't really make. But players, they're very confident guys. They like to bet on themselves. All of that stuff.
Hold on, one aside. If the season starts and we haven't extended him, we can't extend him during the season?
So Jamal is one of those players for which that rule does not apply. So it would be kind of like a Paul George situation last season, where he would be extension eligible throughout the duration of the season. They could extend him at any time. My concern is more getting it done as soon as possible, so that's not a distraction for him or for the team, and also that it opens the window that they have to extend AG earlier.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they would extend AG before they extended Jamal. Like there's like an order of operations to these things, right?
Yep. So many people have different opinions on this, and there are psychological phenomena, I guess, that can occur when you have a contract locked up versus when you don't. And is it going to help Jamal's confidence in his game if he just has it and it's not a distraction, like you're saying? Or is it in everyone's best interest to hold off, and if he plays a little bit during the season and they see how he is or whatever, hypothetically, is that the way to go? I don't know. That sounds not fun to me. But I hope he gets locked up soon, and I wish I could be in Calvin Booth's head and I could know what he was thinking about Jamal right now. But
we talked about on our last show, Josh Kroenke's made the comments. Everything that the team has been saying externally seems to indicate that they want to get the deal done with Jamal as soon as possible. That's public facing, and we obviously don't know Jamal's side of things. So I guess we will find out in the coming weeks. Like, I'm hoping that a deal gets done sooner rather than later, so that we can stop talking about this and start talking about just, what's going on in training camp and preseason. What are you most looking forward to when training camp opens and preseason starts?
Man, nothing. Like, I'm not looking forward to any of that. I'm looking forward to the season, because we're going to get all kinds of quotes from Malone and the coaches and the players about, like, Mike's looking so good and Jamal's looking so good in practice. And it's like, I'm just not going to, like, I expect to hear that, and I'm going to be like, cool, I'm glad that they're saying that and they believe in their players. But maybe I'm like more interested in Malone's comments, because I mean, he can like play the game and protect the players and all that. But for the most part, I usually like take what he says seriously. And I think that he's fairly honest. So I'd be interested to hear what he would say about like how the young players look. I think that's what I'm most forward to hearing about.
I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
Because, last season we got the comments. I can't remember if it was early in the season or if it was during training camp, but he seemed to imply in the most diplomatic way possible, because Malone's Malone, that Peyton Watson was perhaps acting like his spot and his minutes had been like assured. And I think even Peyton, he got questions about this, and I think responded verbally well about how he's like, I need to make sure that I'm giving 100%, that I'm coming in and I'm an energy guy and like all of this stuff. And then we saw it throughout, various like long stretches of the season where he was doing exactly that, right? Malone's comments about Julian are definitely going to matter. We kind of know from what he said last season that he likes to draw ATOs for Julian. He likes how hard he plays, like all of this stuff. I'm actually looking forward to preseason, because we're going to get to at least have a little bit of a taste, maybe, of how they're going to deal with the non-Jokic minutes, because they're probably going to be playing around with lineups more in games that have no consequence, right, than they would in the regular season. So we get to see not only how they look, but maybe how the coaching staff is thinking about some of those lineups in the preseason. And we know that like starters don't necessarily even play every game. They definitely aren't playing their normal minute load in those preseason games anyway. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to watching some Nuggets play basketball.
I mean, when preseason basketball is back, we're all happy because it's actual basketball. So I will be excited to watch that. But because we're that close, I'll be that much more just ready to get to the regular season. But it'll be cool. I can't wait. We're almost there.
All right, well, let's move on to our tier list. We're about to do our definitive preseason NBA tiers. The way that we put this together, it's a combination of criteria having to do with the actual nature of the team, like the roster, the coach, I think factors into this as well. And it's really about how far we expect those teams to go in the playoffs, but there's definitely discussion to be had for what that team's expectations are based on the roster quality, the coaching, maybe the fan base is having to do with that as well. You know, because some teams are more all in than others, right? So eventually we're going to get to our capture the flag tier, but all the teams that are there know that they're tanking. And so they won't be disappointed necessarily to be in the hunt for Cooper Flagg. The S tier are going to be the title favorites. These are the teams that are expected to win their conference and, you know, be the favorites for the NBA title. The A tier are basically conference finals or bust. The reasonable expectation for these teams are that they make the conference finals and that it's a competitive series. Anything less would really feel like an outright failure because these are incredibly good teams that definitely have a good shot at the title. The B tier are expected to make the second round or are good enough to make the second round. And I would put them at a puncher's chance at a conference finals appearance because they have this upset potential. C tier are teams where I think they'll be pretty good in the regular season, but I expect them to be a first round exit, probably because they're a lower seed. Some of these teams might make the playoffs through the play-in, but they're not expected to go far at all. And then the D tier are teams that I would say if they make the playoffs, it will only be through the play-in, and they might not even make the play-in in some instances. And then finally, of course, the F tier. These are the teams that are trying to capture the flag. They are trying to be as bad as possible to win the draft lottery.
We are going to start with S tier, the title favorites, because this is probably the easiest one, I think.
Because I define this tier as teams that are expected to win their conference, the Boston Celtics are really the only team that I could put in this tier. They won the title last year in dominant fashion, just rolling through a very weak Eastern Conference. But, you know, as much as I rag on the East, I have held all season that the Boston Celtics were far and away the best team in that conference and could beat any team that they faced in the finals, and they did happen to face the Mavs, but you know, whatever. They are bringing back all of their guys from their playoff rotation, all the top 8 coming back. The only question for this team is how everyone's going to look after a long playoff run. You had 3 of your top 5 in Tatum, Brown, and Drew Holiday. Oh, sorry, 4, because Derek White, Jaylen Brown did not play in the Olympics. My bad. So it's 3. Tatum, Drew Holiday, and Derek White playing in the Olympics this summer. And then they're going to be coming back early for training camp because they have preseason games in Abu Dhabi versus the Denver Nuggets. And in addition to all of that, Kristaps Porzingis is going to be missing at least the first 3 months of the regular season coming off of his foot surgery. There's going to be a heavy load on all those guys, and they have to have made it through a long summer. So the like not being able to, I think even if they're not the 1 seed in the East, which I still kind of expect them to be, even with the Kristaps injury, they can make a deep playoff run. Kristaps will come back, like all of this stuff, and they'll be basically the same team that they were last year.
I'm not overthinking it too much. The Celtics are the Celtics. They kept all their people. They have an expensive roster. They're really good. They're like probably the most complete and deep roster in the NBA. And I hate to say it, I wouldn't be surprised if they won again. The only thing that would surprise me about it is just how hard it is to repeat. And they're pretty, every team's tired after they win a title. And Jason Tatum played in the Olympics. He didn't look that great. Not that I don't think he's going to be fine next season for sure. He'll have bouts of, playing better and playing worse across the season, just like he always does. But he allows them so much versatility on defense. And if his offense is going too, he's just like super valuable. As much as I want to like hate on him because I think it's fun. Uh, he's very good and it's undeniable. So the Celtics are here to stay until disaster strikes them with the ownership situation and or they finally have to choose between like Drew Holiday and Derek White or something.
They also extended Drew Holiday right before the end of the regular season, I believe.
That's really it for the S tier. We don't have anyone else as much as
right. They're far and away.
Fans.
Like they're who everybody is chasing now. Because that's what happens when you win.
I think on some level, any team that wins the title, I think deserves like some respect to be put in like a title fave tier. Even if like the Celtics lost some pieces, I still would put them here. I might put another team there because I think maybe they're on the same level. But I think it's also just true that the Celtics are like above everyone else at this point until further notice.
Do you think that that there was any player that changed teams this season of the caliber or of the, let's say, impact, because you never know what caliber of player could have a huge impact just because of the fit, that could have the same impact that Drew Holiday or Kristaps Porzingis had on the Celtics in terms of where they stood in the title odds?
I think there's a potential iHeart can do it. I think there's potential Paul George could do it, though I'm more skeptical of that. He's not going to have the same impact defensively, although PG's no scrub on defense, but it's just like having that other third option to play off Tyrese and Embiid theoretically. I'm like, that could be pretty like formidable, but there's a chance where it doesn't work out too. But I'm just saying, like, theoretically, I could see that being kind of like a move. I don't see Mikal Bridges being that kind of impact for the Knicks. I could be wrong. I think that's basically it. There wasn't like a ton of other like massive moves.
Yeah.
Unless I'm forgetting something.
Okay, so let's move on to the A tier then. Will, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so I'll just pick a team.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did have the Sixers here.
That's interesting. We can argue about that.
Okay.
Because I had the Sixers in B tier, but go ahead. I think the A tier case for them is strong. So why don't you go ahead and make it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone always starts out these things with if they're healthy, then they could do this. And like, I don't know how much I subscribe to writing teams off because they're always unhealthy, because I'm always just thinking they must be healthy at some point. Like, it must just happen. Like, with the Kawhi and PG thing. But then it just never happened. And then I was like, well, I guess I should have just been on the board of, like, they're never going to be healthy or do anything. And then I would have looked correct. So, with the Sixers, I'm just kind of like, hey, Embiid, Maxey, PG, they got rid
Drummond.
Yeah, Drummond, they got rid of. Yeah, I like that. They
Kyle
got rid
Lowry,
of Tobias
Reggie
Harris.
Jackson. Right.
Yeah, so I'm just like, look, they have a good roster. I think that's what Sixers fans want. Aside from maybe, and I've said this before, should they have signed like a KCP and someone else instead of PG? But that's not how it worked out. The East is still fairly weak, and I think it's kind of like a toss-up between Sixers and the Bucks and the Knicks and stuff to go to the conference finals. I could see any one of those three getting there if they're all like healthy. Kind of like we saw with the Knicks Sixers. There was injuries and stuff on both sides, and like we just didn't really know how that series was going to go. So I'm still putting them in A tier because I think they could get to the conference finals.
Yeah, I think that's fair because, in my notes, I have written here that I would have them A tier if this tier list was agnostic to history.
Yeah.
And,
it's fair.
They haven't made it past the second round. It hasn't just been because of injury. Because when I think about like, oh, don't write a team off because of injury, it's like if guys are like so injured, they don't play, right? And yes, Embiid has not been 100% in the playoffs, but he hasn't been 100% in the playoffs. Like he just hasn't, right? Whether it's because of the injury or, limitations to his game, like all of this stuff. I do think that they do have right now the best team that they have had since Embiid's been there, but I don't know that it's that by far. Tyrese Maxey is a big reason that I can't completely write this team off like I would because it's Philly.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like you're saying, it would be a massive disappointment if this team, as like really stacked as it is, and it's relatively solid despite my gripes with their lack of a really high level like elite wing defender or power forward even. They're still incredibly good. So I'll let you put them in A tier, but if there was
Okay.
like a B plus tier, I
Yeah,
think
then
that's
that
where
would
I would
be.
put them.
I think your concerns are valid, and like if we put them in order in the tiers, they'd be like last maybe.
Like you're talking about like writing teams off because of injury, and then I look at them. Yes, D'Anthony Melton, like he had issues with his back last season that kept him from really being able to participate until I think the last game of that Knicks series. But the Knicks were missing like
Yeah,
half their rotation in that
yeah, they
series
were.
and beat them.
I think I'm more just talking specifically about Embiid's health. It's like
Right.
if Embiid's healthy, then they have a chance because he's the best player. That may be
Sure.
not even be true. Like maybe he has a bad game, a bad series when he's healthy because whatever reason.
Yeah.
People have argued about this for many years, and I think I'm just not subscribing to the whole idea that they'll never make it past the second round, as we like to clown them for, because I just think the East is not that good despite the top, I think, getting better over the offseason. I mean, the Sixers and the Knicks got better. The Bucks got a little better, maybe, or maybe they got a little worse. I don't know. But
I
Giannis is
don't
still
think they got
Giannis.
worse.
Okay, cool.
Not from last year anyway.
Dame could be better with the second year on the Bucks too, and like figuring it out. And so, but I still think it's just such a toss up between them that I can't fully rule them out, the Sixers, from finally going farther than they ever have.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Tyrese Maxey. Like,
Yeah,
I
he's
just think
really
that
good.
kid's such a
So
dog.
good.
And, now they've got a Caleb Martin who is like a secondary dog
Yeah,
who can do dirty
that's
work things and all of that.
I'm
And we'll
really
see
yeah,
we'll see how it works out.
I'm high on them for sure.
Let's jump into the darlings of the NBA, the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Hmm.
The darlings of NBA Twitter, anyway. A lot of people have the Thunder coming out of the West, but even more people have the Thunder as the favorites for the number one seed. I think that's fair. They were a very good team last year. They were the one seed last year. They added Isaiah Hartenstein. They traded Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. I think they'll still be, say, a top five defense, no question, because they have Dort, they have Caruso, they have Chet. I think Chet got kind of snubbed in the DPOY voting. Like I would have expected a higher finish for him. Not that he should have won, but I think that he took that team from a 12th, top 12 defense to a top five, and I think they were third in defense last year. They were pretty close to third in defense last season. My questions about what it's going to look like next year are really about the offense. I got into like a little bit of an exchange with almost friend of the show, Matt Moore, about what Isaiah Hartenstein doing would change or what his presence on the team on the floor would do to change the offense and the shot profile of the team. They don't have like a super impressive shot profile. They just didn't last season. They were 16th in rim frequency, 24th in mid range. That's because they took a lot of mid ranges, and then 18th in 3-point frequency. So you want to be higher for threes, and then you want to be taking fewer mid ranges. But it was fine because like Shea was a mid range master. Like they were making a bunch of their threes. They were very efficient at the rim. So they just had high efficiency in every area of the floor as a team. I'm still trying to figure out if Hartenstein will help the shot profile. I don't think he'll make it worse because they'll probably be taking more attempts at the rim just because he'll get a lot of offensive rebound putbacks. He'll be able to apply rim pressure just with him on the roll. They'll probably use him in the dunker spot some, which is something that I wanted them to do with Chet more. And we saw towards the latter end of that series against the Mavs, it was very effective to have a lob threat there so that it was harder to help on Shea's isolations, on his drives, etc. But I don't know by how much he's going to help the shot profile. And I do think that Josh Giddey did help them just generate lots of layups just because of his playmaking. They they were 5.6% higher rim frequency with Giddey on the floor than off, which led the team among the starters anyway. I think it was actually Micic that led the team, but he didn't play a ton of minutes for them in terms of the on-off with rim frequency. But I do think, again, Hartenstein can help with that. But does it matter if their shot profile doesn't improve if they just continue to shoot the shit out of the ball?
Nope, because they're good.
Exactly. J-Dub, he had a rough second round in the playoffs, but he's going to continue to develop. We already think that he is incredibly good. He's going into his third year. He's probably going to be primed for a most improved player award. These things tend to be about a year late.
Can you explain the Matt Moore thing to me? Because does he just like is big on the Thunder and he's tired of like Nuggets fans like.
Oh, so I wasn't actually even ragging on them. I think he had commented something about whether OKC was being overrated next year because he was trying to like pull things back. And then I said that I wonder if iHeart's going to help their shot profile, but I think he thought that I was like criticizing what iHeart would mean to the offense. Like, I don't actually think iHeart's going to hurt the offense. Like, I think it's just going to change what they do because I don't think if you have iHeart like camping out in the paint, unless they're using him in the dunker spot, like I said, or rolling a lot, that Shea's going to get quite as many like isolations and like pull-ups in that mid-range that are like clean like he tends to do. But it'll change the shot profile.
And he's going to give them second chance looks for other really good players.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Like,
and I think he's a high IQ player. He can pass. They can use him as a hub. There's lots of things that they can do with him. It's just a question of like, okay, well, how are they going to use him and how long will the adjustment take? Because it is a different look than they used last year where it was pretty much all 5 out. Maybe he just kind of supplants those big Jalen Williams minutes where they were basically using Jalen Williams as kind of, sometimes he was off ball like catch and shooter, but they used him as a hub a fair bit as well. My question about how far should we expect this team to go? Because this tier list is about expectations. Are they too young still? It was interesting going back in the history because the Oklahoma City Thunder have actually been the youngest team in the league by average age every season since the 2020 to 2021 season, except last year, which was their best season, right? Not that it was because of the older players on that roster, because it was like Micic and whoever else that were kind of dragging up that average. But this season, again, they're about to be the youngest in the league and tied for the youngest with the Utah Jazz, who are definitely not going to be in this tier, right? There is some precedent for it in the 2015 Warriors, who were this was a young core that won a title with an MVP caliber guard in Steph Curry, right? They are actually the 2015 Warriors, the only team in the top 10 since 1980, in the top 10 of the youngest championship cores. So like all of the other super young teams won their championships before 1980, which was over 40 years ago. I think some people put it on experience, how much the young players on that team struggled with shooting in the playoffs compared to the regular season last year. Because like we said, they could shoot the shit out of the ball, and that's how they got the 1 seed, but that didn't end up translating when they got to particularly the second round of the playoffs. I don't know whether to attribute that to their youth/inexperience in playoff settings, or because I think they need an athletic slasher who can cut to the rim because they don't really have that archetype on their team.
Could Alex Caruso kind of fill in that a little bit?
He's not really a slasher. He's a catch and shooter, right?
Okay.
And he's not somebody you want dribbling the ball for extended periods of time. And that's the other thing. Like, again, I've mentioned this before. They got rid of Giddey. They didn't replace the ball handling.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hurt the Nuggets.
That's what I'm saying. Like, no one's talking about this in the case of the Thunder. But last year, all anyone could talk about is the fact that their only ball handlers, the Nuggets' only ball handlers, were Jamal Murray and Reggie Jackson. But now it's really just Shea and then Cason Wallace.
Yeah, and he could take a leap. I don't know.
Absolutely, he could. But he does seem like a more defensively oriented point guard and who can shoot. Like, he can shoot the shit out of the ball. Like, I never want to give that guy an open look. And he's going to have a lot of defensive responsibility as well. So how much ball handling are they going to give him? It was just an issue that they also faced in that second round that they not only did not address, but got rid of the only other one that they had on the team, which is fine, but they didn't replace that function. So that's just another question I have about them. And yet they're in this A tier because they have everything else going for them. They
Yeah.
have Shea, they have J-Dub, they have Chet, they have Isaiah Hartenstein, they have Caruso, they have Dort. Like, this is going to be a very formidable team to contend with.
Also, I mean, Dort and SGA just played in the Olympics, and we talked about on
Yes.
our Olympic preview, and Voya Medic brought up that a lot of the times when players go and play FIBA ball, they can improve their game because it's a stiff competition, it's a different kind of game, and they learn from it. And I think, for a young team, that's something that is valuable, and especially young players who are really good like them. I hate to
Right.
say it, but the Thunder are legit. I'm done with the maybe they're too young and inexperienced. I think in an era like this, I would not be surprised with a team this young like winning a championship just because of talent and how college players are playing and people just they're really good and the Thunder are well run and they just they impressed me in the playoffs despite the fact that they had some flaws and I wasn't expecting them to go to the championship, and I think that was fair to say all season last season. This year, I think that's over, and I didn't put them in the title favorites, obviously, but I think this is the perfect tier for them to be. And
Yeah, because they still have to show it. Like, they have to
yeah,
show that this new formula that they're going to have works.
but I'm putting the
But
pressure on them. Like,
yeah,
you have a freaking good roster. It kind of reminds me of when the Nuggets got KCP and Bruce. They got Caruso and Ihart, two amazing additions that could technically get you to the finals, just like the Nuggets did. And once you get there, who knows who you're, playing? If it's the Celtics or the 8-seeded Heat that just made a crazy run. So get to the finals, see how it
well,
goes.
that's the East, though.
Yeah, that's the East.
We're not.
Yeah.
No one's having a run like that out of the play in the West. The
Nope.
Lakers got schmacked once they got to the conference finals last year or 2023.
Yeah.
And they had injury luck and they got to face the Warriors.
Yeah, I don't think.
There's just
Actually, before we go to the next team, I think when I was placing my teams in the tiers, I was trying to count out the number of teams I had. I tried to put like 8 from each conference in these top playoff tiers.
Interesting.
I think these are the playoff teams that are going to make it.
I think
not that you have to do that.
It was, for me, it was more like I could already see that there were going to be teams that disappointed
Right.
that expectation. So, like, we're about to finish we're going to go through the rest of this conference finals or bust tier. There can't be that many teams that make the conference finals in both conferences. Like, because we have more than 4, including both conferences, right? So there are going to be teams that disappoint. So similar to we talked about in the Olympics, how you could see, obviously, like USA getting a medal, but of the other 2, you would expect Serbia, Germany, Canada, and then France had that puncher's chance upset potential to upset one of those 3. But even if France hadn't, there were only 2 medals left for 3 teams. And then France came and took another one, right? So I think that there are going to be teams that disappoint, and that's fine. But that's why we're setting expectations.
Yeah. Let's just go with Nuggets because that's who I have. Man, there's just so many questions with the Nuggets.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the situation. As much as trying to be good Nuggets fans and stay optimistic because we love them and we love Jokic and Jamal, and you can be anywhere on if you're ready to sell stock on Jamal. Everyone believes in Jokic, so there's a range of emotions here. But I just am like, Jokic is the best player in the world, so you can't count them out of at least making the conference finals. That seems like doable. And I don't know if you said this, but I do think if we didn't make the conference finals, that would be considered a failure and like some kind of change would happen. And there could even be someone fired, potentially.
Last year, they could have made the conference finals and they didn't. Like, they could have made the finals. They
We
could
were
have won the
so
title
close.
and they didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, last year, I would have put them in S, even with the questions that we had about the roster, because we still had KCP. We still had, best starting 5 in basketball, all of that stuff. Obviously, Jamal wasn't healthy. The starters got completely schmacked. They were just not on it in the playoffs. And that's on them, right? Like, that's whether it's about being healthy or being rested enough, being focused in the game when the playoffs start. That's on the players. They need to figure that out. But in terms of where they sit in the Western Conference picture, the first thing that I looked at with each team is what seed do I kind of expect, or what range of seeding do I kind of expect them to be in? And they still have Jokic and Malone. I was looking back at the numbers on this. they have played at a 50-win pace, greater than a 50-win pace, every season since they started making the playoffs in 2019. Of course, or that's with Jokic and Jamal healthy. Of course, we had the 2022 season where they just barely made the playoffs without Jamal and MPJ. In 2024, obviously 57 wins, 2023, 53 wins, 2022, no Jamal, MPJ. In 2021, it was a shortened season. They went 47-25, and I checked it's a 53-win pace. In 2020, they were playing at a 51-win pace. And in 2019, they made the playoffs with 54 wins. So effectively, since they started making the playoffs, when you have Jokic, Jamal, and Malone coaching them, they are guaranteed a top seed. So I'm like, okay, they're going to finish somewhere in the top 4. The West is also maybe the most competitive it has ever been, right? So that's why I'm not going to guarantee them, say, top 3. But I do think that they can make that. Obviously, the top 4 guys, they're all in their primes. MPJ kind of entering his still. He's 25. I keep forgetting how young he is.
Damn.
No. MPJ, he's 26. Jamal in his prime is his age 27, or I guess he's entering his age 28 season. Jokic is not yet 30 until like the end of this regular season, so that's good.
Well, can I just say, when we won the title, there was like a lot of narratives about the Nuggets being younger. You know, AG's young, relatively. Jokic is not 30. Jamal and MPJ are young. They got this core, like they're going to be, around for a long time, which is true. We're going to be around. We just don't know what around means yet. But we've very quickly gone to like this other narrative where it's like, whoa, they're getting up there in age.
So Ryan Blackburn has this really, I think, a good term for it, where it's basically the core's competitive half-life is up.
Right.
In that their like prime window, we are past halfway through that now. And once you get to the other half of that prime window, like you start to see some decline, all this stuff. It's a little different because like MPJ is still on the younger end. Like Jamal is like really just entering his prime right now. Like, for, and it differs by position too. I think Jokic is probably, because like just bigs and centers in general, and AG as well, because so much of his game relies on his strength, his athleticism, all of that, are closer to like the end of that, like halfway through like your kind of peak years. And yeah, like in sports, like this stuff just disappears in an instant. You could be on top of the world, and then I think part of it is also that the league has gotten better. Like I talked about this yesterday online, where the reason I see the Nuggets as having diminished their standing is because so much, particularly in the West, has gotten better, and they've clearly gotten worse, not by a lot, but by enough that they're no longer like head and shoulders better than everyone else. But I see them as firmly in the mix of that like top tier, right? And you could say that the way you look at the core, being like 29, like that also used to be like kind of young, right? But the NBA has actually gotten younger over the years. I think it's some of the youngest it's been in over 50 years, because it used to be kind of young in like the 60s also, which is probably why you had all those young champions. And that's like athleticism, skill. It's like all of this stuff, to where what it takes to be seen as kind of like peak, like these guys are going to be like, the questions are different now, even though you have players like the Stephs, the LeBrons, the KDs that are playing like well into their 30s,
old years,
at a high level. I don't really think anyone expects Jokic to maintain like this kind of level into like that kind of longevity, in large part because he's a center. Like that's just that just doesn't happen. And also, yeah, his game doesn't rely on his athleticism, but there's a certain like baseline you have to be able to maintain. And I think
he's very physical.
He's
a very physical player. So
yes.
It's like, yeah, that I
exactly.
I wouldn't,
like there's more where.
I wouldn't be mad if someone like was questioning it as much as I love Jokic, and he
sure,
who knows?
And that's after you get past the question, which people like to speculate on like how long is Jokic even going to want to play in the NBA, and I'm like, well, if the max contracts go up to like 80 million a year, that's a lot of incentive to stay.
I know. I like that.
Yeah, but like I said, these guys are in their primes. I think that Minnesota is the only team that I'd consider picking to beat them outright in a series. I'd said this on a previous episode where I said, if you're looking at like where the Nuggets sit competitively, say in a playoff series against any of the best teams in the West, is there any team that you would expect to beat them in 6 games or less? I don't think so. I think even Minnesota, I'm like, that's a coin toss series because we just saw a coin toss series because it went to 7 games. And so because of that, I don't see them as any worse than any of the other teams that we're going to have in this tier.
Yeah. Well, I think Minnesota beat us, but we also beat ourselves. So I sometimes think like we're like every team has this, we're not unique in that where, something happens or you don't play the right way or something with the chemistry is off or you're exhausted from being played too much, whatever it is. Like there are things you can do that shoot yourself in the foot. So it's obviously complicated. And I don't know. I'd have to see how the Nuggets and Thunder play in the regular season to see like what I think about that. But like they're so talented that maybe they could just talent their way.
The Houston Rockets kicked our butts last season.
Yeah.
Do you think that they'd beat us in a playoff series?
I think there's a potential that the Thunder could still beat us. I just don't know how that'll work out.
They have a lot of good defenders for Jamal.
Yeah, that's the other thing with the whole conversation with like them in their primes is like, can we expect any of them to get better? And if yes, how much?
MPJ is kind of the only one of the 4 that you could expect to get better. You could expect Jamal to become more consistent.
Right.
Especially in the regular season, because if, we're talking about, what if Jamal wants to try to make it all NBA and like get a Supermax? If he did that, first of all, Dynasty's over. Because that Supermax, having 2 Supermax contracts, I think the Celtics are the only other team that do that. Actually, no, because Booker and Beal, I think, are both on Supermax contracts. But second of all, if he does that, we're going to win the 1 seed. Because when Jamal plays well, we play at we win games at a ridiculous clip.
Yep.
I wouldn't want that. Like I would want him to pace himself reasonably, not like he normally does, through the regular season so that he is rested and healthy and all of that for the playoffs. Another reason to just extend the man. Because I don't want him working himself to the bone just to not make all NBA, really, and not being ready for the playoffs. But anyway, anything else you want to say about the Nuggets?
Nope.
All right.
I love them. That's all I have to say. Next team.
Love them too. All right. I have the Wolves in A tier. I think you do too.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That was one that I was debating, but then I was like, nah, I have to do it.
It's interesting with the Timberwolves because I still have a lot of questions about them in the playoffs versus, say, like a really good defense, because I kind of think about them in the same tier as the Grizzlies for that same reason. Like, I don't really get what they're going to do when teams take away what they like their first or second options on offense. But one, they have Ant, although I think Ja is just a really good like point guard and playmaker, and he can break a defense when he wants to. But also their defense is so good, like it's a game-breaking defense, as we saw, unfortunately, against almost any team. They could be a game-breaking defense. I think that they actually could have been a lot more effective against the Mavs than they were in the Western Conference Finals last year. And they made it there. Like, they beat the defending champions in 7 games, like nerves of steel, really, because after the Nuggets go up 3-2, after you start with a 2-0 lead in that series, like you could see another team like folding, but like that team has nerves of steel. Like they've got the moxie for it. I think they have the talent for now, though I do think they are too reliant at the moment on Mike Conley to create efficient and coherent offense. They did just draft Rob Dillingham or like trade for him, whatever it was with the Spurs. They need him to hit, and he's like one of the youngest players in the rookie class right now. I don't know that he will hit immediately in the NBA, although he looks incredibly talented. And they need Cat to be better than he was in the Western Conference Finals last year, because the odds are that they will, if they face the Mavs, it would be not that late, although we're going to talk about the Mavs in a bit. And he's their second star, right? Like, he contributes to their offensive woes as well. And he was like the worst of the starters in terms of contributing to good offense, which you wouldn't expect between him and Rudy, but Rudy was setting screens. Rudy was helping run pick and roll. Like, Cat just looked completely lost in that Mavs series. So he needs to be better. Kind of reverted to that unreliable guy that everyone didn't really believe in when it came to evaluating the Wolves last year. But he also made strides, right? Because up until that point, he was having a great playoffs on both ends of the floor. My question for this team is, do you think that they'll be able to maintain the defensive intensity that they did last year throughout another season and postseason after the deep playoff run that they just had?
Yeah, that's the question for Cat and Ant, I think, because they rely on them to be defensively intense and to hold up in different situations to solve certain problems. And they got to keep up the offensive output too, because they're the heads of that. So it's like you have, well, I mean, I know Rudy Gobert is like the best defensive player they have technically, but I think there's ways around that. And then Ant and Cat kind of have to step up when they're trying to exploit the Gobert things that you can do against him. So I don't know. I've always said that formula is kind of risky to have your best offensive players also have to be your defensive like stoppers. I mean, Jaden's better than Ant. I get that, but Ant's very good on ball too. And there's a very
and he has to be, because he's not as locked in off ball. Like, that was part of the formula that I think was under discussed, in that, like, when Ant has his assignment in front of him, he can stay engaged. So part of the benefit of putting him on the ball is that he's not a sieve off the ball.
Yeah, and I felt like that's what they did a lot, and it wasn't as like much of Jaden McDaniels just being a ball stopper on ball. It was Ant, and then Jaden being amazing off ball, and that was like the secret power. And,
at least against the Nuggets, right? Like, it's going to change depending on the matchup.
But I think like they're versatile, right? So they can do it when they need to. But I guess if Ant is really bad off ball, then that's something to exploit. Maybe he'll improve in that. Maybe he'll improve on offense this year too, because he's still growing and like could add stuff to his game.
I think it's more about shot selection than anything. Like, he can do everything. Like, he can pull up, he can post up, he can catch and shoot.
His playmaking could still get better.
Yes. In terms of like the offensive game, you're right. He can add I think making quicker reads and making easier reads, and then the shot selection as well, because part of running an offense is keeping the offense flowing, not being a ball stopper. Because even if you're making those tough shots, you're not keeping everybody in rhythm, like all this stuff. Like, this is the difference between a scoring guard and a point guard, right? We've talked about this so much on this show, and that is definitely still an area that he can improve. And he is only 22 still.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to be surprised if he gets better somehow. So it's like, what did they do to improve their chances and really get themselves in a position to go all the way? Not much, but Ant could be really good and their defense could lock down.
I just think it takes a lot of energy to play that way. And I'll be interested to see if they're able to, like, maybe they're not they were the number one defense last year. Maybe they're like number 2 or 3 this year.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And what that means for the slide, because if the offense stays the same, then maybe they only win 52 games instead of the 56, that kind of thing. And it's a tough West, man. But I think they can do it. And I think they did it once, like made the conference finals, that is. All right. What's next? Well,
let's go to the Knicks. I think I did debate putting them in B tier. I just don't know. Like, is losing iHeart going to be a huge detriment? Or will Mikal Bridges being on the team be something that's going to be super productive and great for them?
No, I think that's really fair. The reason I actually agree with putting the Knicks in A tier here is I'm comparing them to the rest of the East. If they were in the West, this would be a B tier team. So that's part of the kind of contextual nature of these expectations, where it's conference finals or bust. Like, I think if the Knicks were in the West, there's no way that you could consider, say, going 7 games and losing the second round to be a failure, of a year, given how talented the West is. And it's not like the Knicks have Brunson, but it's not like, the Nuggets with Jokic, where they have like this all-time player they should be maximizing every single year. Like the Knicks are just trying to be as good as possible. But in the East, I think they can make the conference finals because, like, bottom line, when they're healthy, I think they're as good as any team in the East besides Boston. So if they can stay healthy, which is, like, for me, the biggest question mark outside of losing Hartenstein, they should be able to make the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, there's no reason that they should have lost that Pacers series, even missing the players that they had, except that Josh Hart also got injured in the middle of that series. Yeah, it was just, and so did Brunson. It was just really tough.
Again, like, it kind of goes back to what I was saying with the Sixers, where the Sixers and in the East, and we'll talk about the Bucks. I think it's kind of like a coin toss, and maybe they'll emerge clear matchup advantage favorites where the Sixers are just going to like run over the Knicks based on how they're playing or something, or it could be the other way around. I just don't really know yet, and I got to get into the season to see some of that. And even then, the regular season's weird. We won't really know how it'll be until we get closer to the playoffs.
I think part of like thinking about this conference finals or bust tier for the East that's different than the West, where you could see a lot of top teams in the West like beating each other in a very competitive series. Whereas in the East, if you're assuming that Boston's going to be the 1 seed, you need to make sure that you're the 2 seed to end up on the opposite side of that bracket so that you don't see them until the conference finals if you're a team that has to make the conference finals. So I think the regular season equation matters a lot more here, and that's probably where I'd probably give the edge to the Sixers. But you could also see the Knicks doing it because they were injured as hell last year, and they still made it to 50 wins and got that 2 seed.
Yeah. I just can't count them out.
Right.
They could do it. They could get to the conference finals. I think I was going to say, like this tier, we have it conference finals or bust. I don't want people to take it too literally because I'm not saying, if the Thunder don't make the conference finals, blow up the entire team. Like, they're still so young. They're going to keep them mostly together. I think they may make tweaks depending on what the reason was why they maybe got a weakness exploited or something. I think there's some teams in this tier, like the Sixers or the Wolves, where if they don't make it to the conference finals, like, serious shit will go down. And maybe even the Nuggets too. Because it's like Embiid's going to be tired of not winning. And who knows what Ant will do when it's time to like extend or something if the Wolves just keep not making it. They might trade Cat.
Last summer. Ant extended last summer.
Well, whatever. The next time, like in 5 years or whatever the hell it is, he might leave.
Right.
Like,
these are expensive teams, right? That's the other one, is that the Wolves are a second apron team. So that definitely plays into things. Except OKC, who is not. Like they have like the most pressure because they're so good, and also the least pressure because like they could change whatever they want at any time.
Yeah, so it's like, I'm not saying the Thunder are bust. I just wanted to say that. But let's talk about the Bucks because I had them in this tier too.
I did as well, actually. Okay. So I actually wrote down Bucks, but I could be convinced to move them down. Like, if you had them lower, I probably wouldn't have fought it. And most of my notes were actually the anti-A tier case for the Bucks. So maybe you could respond to some of these things, right? They have been a first round exit 2 years in a row now. They were a second round exit in 2022, which was the year after they won the title. Just like this thing where, like, you win the title, you don't make it past the second round. This is the next year. That's just like what happens. They have Giannis and they have Dame. Last year, they were atrocious defensively as a team. Maybe got a little bit better after they fired Griffin and hired Doc Rivers, but I didn't see like sustained improvement on that end of the floor. But they were a top 5 offense, I think, for most of the year. I think they ended up top 6 overall. Will the Giannis and Dame combo continue to produce top offense in the NBA? Because if they want to win a lot of games and get a high seed, because that's part of the formula, especially in the East, they are going to need to have top offense. Do you think they're going to be able to produce that and then get the defense to an acceptable level?
I think they can. I mean, I don't know that they will, but I'm not like, again, like, I'm trying to be fair. A lot of these teams I like to joke about and hate on in other contexts. But if I'm like trying to be honest with myself, I just think the Bucks could still get to the conference finals and they could put something together. I think getting rid of Malik Beasley was really good despite his shooting, because I think they need more defense. And they got weird additions that may work. And Chris Middleton, I think, is going to be healthy. And they were really good when he was playing.
Yeah.
So I just can't like deny that.
They were one of the best 5-man units when all their starters played, even with Malik
Yeah.
Beasley, like Dame Malik,
Yeah.
Chris,
That's true.
Brooke, and Giannis, right? They
Yeah.
were like around like Nuggets and like the Knicks with OG tier in terms of net rating, but it was like all the staggers where it wasn't just those 5 playing together. They did, I think, improve their core of role players this offseason, right? But by how much? I don't know.
Their fringe players like Gary Trent
Yeah.
and such could be an improvement. I know Asher was on the show saying he didn't think Gary Trent was that big of a deal, which very well could be right about that. I mean, Giannis is still a top 3 player in the world. And Dame was like actually good. Like his stats like were actually impressive when I was like looking into like his shot making. It's just a matter of like the
The
defense.
efficiency was really bad. Like he took a long time to get to it. And I know like Doc Rivers, and I think even Dame has talked about like he had a really weird summer last year.
Oh yeah, he was like
because
never in shape. Was what
he
he was
wasn't
saying.
like training during the summer because of all of the trade stuff. Like he just wasn't in the gym. And then it takes forever in the season to catch up if you're not ready, when everything starts. He did start to catch some rhythm toward the end of the year, but then obviously in the playoffs, he had the Achilles thing. And and that also comes with age, right? Like both him and Giannis, like they haven't been the most available stars. Part of the reason that the Bucks have been early exits in the playoffs the last couple of years is because of missing Giannis. And I thought they would have traded Brook Lopez by now. Like I thought that was a deal that was created to be traded last summer, but maybe it's because I also thought that it's not like it had a player option or anything. Maybe they should have included some partial guarantees just to make it a little bit more movable. But it seems like all the rumors about them moving Brook Lopez that gets resulted in stalls because it's hard for other teams to take on that kind of money under this new CBA environment also. So that's difficult. And I did think that they would need to trade him for like an athletic wing and just to upgrade another position and just have Giannis play more at center. But that's not going to happen. They're going to continue to be, this kind of Twin Towers-y team. I think Bobby Portis actually had a really good second half of his season, but he was absolutely atrocious in the first half of last season, really on both ends of the floor, but especially defensively. But then he was really good after that,
Right.
especially offensively in the second half. So maybe he'll hit the ground running earlier, but maybe he won't. Like he's not a particularly old player, but he's not, young either. He was really important for them as their 6th man during their more successful seasons. So I do think that this stuff matters because he's only 29. I think it matters that the role players are better because like Giannis would miss games last season, and I've watched them end the gap in athleticism when Giannis is on the floor versus off for that team is maybe the biggest of any team. If you took Anthony Edwards off the floor for the Minnesota Timberwolves, the team doesn't look unathletic. But for the Bucks, take Giannis off the floor and you're like, is this an NBA team? Like what? They were like slow. They couldn't there's just no. So that's why I thought it was important that they upgraded, say, a Jay Crowder to a Taurean Prince. Not that he's athletic, but he doesn't look unathletic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Jay Crowder was really, I was like, can this guy move? Like he was just getting cooked on defense, which is his main value. It was just bad things. Pat Connaughton is still on the team as their backup point guard. I don't know if they're going to try to move him.
Coming out of the season, I was lower on Damian Lillard. And I know some things came to light with Doc Rivers saying some shit about Dame and how he never could be in shape and all that. And it was Jason Timpf in his player rankings. He ranked Dame pretty high. I can't remember what number, but I was kind of shocked by it. He thought he was one of the best playoff shot creators, and he cited that he was 33-8 on 65% true shooting in his last 10 playoff games. I was surprised by that, but you got to get to the playoffs, which the Bucks will because the East is terrible. So
yeah, they'll definitely make the playoffs. Yeah. Do you of the 3 East teams that we've talked about, the Bucks, the Knicks, and the Sixers, where do you rank the Bucks?
I think I might have the Knicks and the Sixers ahead of them right now, just because they just consistently been disappointing. Well, I guess so of the Sixers, but I just think the Sixers. I don't know. I haven't really seen the Sixers and Bucks. They haven't played in the playoffs.
That's right.
So like I don't know really where to put them. Like if they played
Like
against each
versus
other, who
each
would
other.
win?
Oh, I see. Because you could see, like, we have 3 teams here, like we talked about the expectation. Three teams in this tier, and obviously the Celtics are there. They're gonna make the conference finals. The Celtics just make the conference finals. That's just what they do, right? But only one of these other teams can make the conference finals, so they're going to face off against each other, assuming the Celtics get the 1 seed. They're gonna face off against each other in the, second round.
It sucks because Giannis has won a championship, so I feel bad like kind of being lower on them. But I
Yeah.
like hating Embiid, but sometimes I just think handling Embiid when he's like firing on all cylinders is just so much more of a problem than
Oh
Giannis.
yeah, Giannis is so much easier to scheme against,
Yeah,
which is
that's
why
what I
it's
think.
like I do think that having Dame and then using Giannis differently than they have, which is like basically playing like a wing. But if they have Giannis playing more like a big, and they can because they have a stretch 5 in Brook Lopez, using him more as a roller and using him on like handoffs with Dame and all of that stuff, they actually have a bigger potential to neutralize his offensive weaknesses and turn Giannis, as he should be, an offensive strength. Like when you have a player that dominant, there are so many different ways you can utilize him. But I do think that whether it's because of his preference or previous coaching, like whatever it was, they just need to do some different things to maximize him. And they might do that, they might not. But I think that the supporting cast is the bigger question mark for me, just in terms of getting there, like getting to the second round into a competitive series with either the Knicks or the Sixers. And I do think that they're on upset watch, right? Like I was ready to put them in B tier and put them as an upset potential team where I'm like, yeah, I could see them beating like the Knicks or the Sixers in a second round and then making the conference finals that way.
Which
But
maybe that
now
that
it's like, well, you do have Giannis and they are on the clock, right? He did extend last year,
yeah.
but he could always ask out, and he
Yeah.
has good reason to, frankly, because it's not that the Bucks haven't done right by him. It's just that they cashed in all their chips and now they don't have as many tools available to them. Another second apron team. He
And
might
I
just want to
think
go to a
Dame,
better
like, if it
situation.
doesn't start working, like, he's going to decline quickly. Like, I'm sorry. He's small. His shot is really good. Like, he could be one of those players, that plays into later ages because he's just so good at shooting and, like, you got that
Yeah.
gravity. But I am also just skeptical of it.
And the
Um,
defense, like,
yeah, really
it was already
bad.
bad. Can it get worse? Maybe.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think if the Dame thing doesn't work out, they have to quickly pivot from that. I like am excited for the end of this season because we could really see some fireworks with like Embiid, disgruntled Giannis. But that also means like Giannis could go to the Warriors, which I would really hate. So
Or to the Thunder.
they'd have to give up something, or do they have enough
They
like
have a
room to just
giant
get him?
contract in Hartenstein. They'd have to pair that with some other stuff, but they've got the draft capital.
Let's hope they make the conference finals and like still
Can some
believe in
other
the
East teams show some goddamn potential so someone can go to them already? Oh my gosh.
yeah.
All right, let's move on to the last team that I have in the A tier, the Dallas
I
Mavericks.
do have them.
So they made the NBA Finals last year. They won the West. Does that make them the best team in the West? No. But are they solid and just as good potentially as every other team that we have at the top of the West? Yeah, I think, especially defensively. They didn't re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. like we talked about on our offseason episode, but they did sign Najee Marshall. The biggest question for me with them is Klay Thompson actually going to start? Because I think if he does, I look at this team completely differently, and maybe downgrade them, because their defense is really what carried them to the stellar record that they had post All-Star break and what propelled them through the playoffs, because Luka was like terrible for 2.5 rounds or
Right.
like a round and a half. Yeah. Because
Hmm.
he kind of started to find his mojo again at the end of the Thunder series. But their defense like won them games. Even when like Luka was shooting like 30% from the field kind of games. And they're not a good three-point shooting team in terms of efficiency anymore, or they weren't after they got rid of Grant Williams and they replaced them with more like PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. basically because he was on the team already, but he wasn't as big a part of the rotation. But if you add Klay Thompson, obviously you get the shooting back. But the Mavs had like a top offense early in the season, but it wasn't translating to being a top team in the West, right? They were
Hmm.
fighting to get out of the play-in post All-Star break because there was that play-in mix where the difference was like 2 games between like 6 teams, between like fifth the 5th seed and like the 9 seed. The difference is like 2 games for a really long time, right? So they had to claw their way out of that, and they managed to do it. So the West is competitive as hell. So I don't want to downgrade a team for struggling because in the West, because the West is solid. So I kind of like have a lot of those teams that are like in that milieu similarly. But the Mavs did have to dig themselves out of the hole, and they did it with defense. So if they downgrade their defense substantially by starting Klay Thompson, I look at them very differently. But I'm going to give them the best case scenario with Najee Marshall, incredible versatility on the wing, like having a real wing defender there. And then, Luka, Kyrie do their thing. Derek Lively continues to develop. Or maybe Daniel Gafford's going to be starting again, but then they have amazing bench minutes because Derek Lively is their backup setter.
Or they could start him in different times, or Lively start some games, Gafford starts some games.
Sure.
Something like that could be cool. I think it just comes down to how Klay is and how their defense is, for sure. That's the big hot button items. We have very intelligent people like Dan Favale, who's higher on the Mavs. I don't know where he is lately, but he liked those changes that they did in the offseason.
I think that they're straightforward upgrades if it's like Klay is playing the Tim Hardaway Jr. role.
That's true.
Then his defense is terrible, but it's not worse than Tim Hardaway Jr. And he's a better shooter and he has actual gravity. But if he's starting, that's a different equation.
Which we'll see. I think Klay will accept that he can't start and come off the bench at some point, even if it starts the season out with him starting or something. I think that'll happen. Kyrie and Luka and people will be a good enough locker room environment that Klay will like mesh and he'll accept some kind of role, whatever is required of him, because he kind of needs to make this work. Someone lower than a 3 seed has not won the finals. So the Mavs, they were in a worse seed because they didn't make those trades until the deadline. And I think if that was their team going into the season, they might have finished higher than the seed that they were. And then they wouldn't have had this path that maybe made them too tired or whatever the hell happened versus Celtics, which I think the Celtics were just better than them if they were a 3 seed. Yeah, but you're not doing yourself any favors by going through what they went through, although maybe it was an easier path than like what Denver had.
It's ironic because I think that I said this throughout the year that the team that was going to beat the Celtics was going to beat them with their offense because the Celtics' biggest strength was their defense. As good as their offense was during the regular season, and at times it looked impressive in the playoffs, but it wasn't game breaking. They have a game breaking defense. If you can get around that, you beat that team. The Mavs got better overall as a team by effectively trading offense for defense in these pieces and how they were managing their rotations. They face the Celtics. Their offense is not enough to break the Celtics defense, and their defense wasn't good enough to stop the Celtics the way that they like to play offense. Like, I actually think that that's a matchup problem for the Mavs as they were constructed.
The OKC Mavs matchup's so much more interesting now.
So why is that?
Just because of iHeart being on of OKC, I think he just helps them more.
I think it's iHeart's impact on the offense, though, because I actually think that OKC did the best job, besides Boston, of the 3 teams they face in the West, did the best job defending Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the offense because it's the way the Mavs were playing defense was really limiting them. Yeah.
Then it was like finally, OKC figured it out by the end. Like, if we have Chet in the dunker spot, it's harder for them to crowd the drives. But they don't play that way, right? But with iHeart, they would maybe have to if they want to put those two together.
And now they've figured that out and they've experienced it and they can try and put stuff like that into practice. And so every team needs some kind of luck going on these runs. Yeah. And I think playing a young Thunder team was a good path for them. All right, let's go to this B tier, which is the upset potential. So we kind of had this as they will make the second round probably. This is like the Mavs last year, what they actually did, what they achieved.
I would have put the Dallas Mavericks as a B tier team. I think even before I saw how they went in the playoffs, because we saw them look really strong down the stretch of the season. Once they clawed their way out of that play-in, playoff cusp, melange, whatever, they were going to be the 5 seed at least. And I was like, okay, this is really good. They have Luka, all this stuff. They have everything they need to potentially upset a higher seed. And then they upset every higher seed on their way to the finals. So these are the teams where I don't necessarily expect them to be a top 3 or 4 seed, but I could see them in a second round matchup upsetting an upper seed just because they have an interesting formula for, say, a playoff series or like a really good player. What's the first team that you have here?
Well, I only have 2 teams in this tier.
Oh,
So I
interesting. Okay.
have Grizzlies.
Okay. I'm expecting a Ja revenge season. Like, we saw him come back for, what was it, 4 games after he'd missed the 25 with his suspension, and he was like electric. He made the Grizzlies offense work, and it's one of those things where I was previously grouping the Grizzlies with teams like the Cavs and the Pelicans, where I'm like, their stars don't quite fit offensively. They're more defensively oriented teams. But after seeing the difference in the Grizzlies with and without Ja, it made me realize that the real like issue with the Grizzlies offense are like the Ja off minutes. But when he's on, he actually does a good job of making pieces fit that wouldn't otherwise fit because he is such a good playmaker. Not that they're not going to be a top offense because they don't have like a lot of shooting. They're not like a, that kind of like high volume team. They create buckets in, very like conventional ways, actually, with the high volume of like pick and roll that Ja plays. But it's enough that it makes sense. And then they have an excellent defense. With the like Ja's really the only negative defensive player on that team. And even he can make plays, right? Like he can, get some steals off ball. He's got a ridiculous vertical. He can block some shots, all of that stuff. And I think they're just really, really good at the things that they do. And they mostly stick to that when they're playing at their best, right? That's the other thing is like you see teams that like don't have a defined identity. I think the thing that separates the Grizzlies from a team like the Cavs or the Pelicans, which we'll get to, is that they have their defined identity. Everyone knows their roles. We saw last year without Ja, obviously some guys had to step into greater roles, but now they're going to get to, pare that back. And even in those few games after Ja came back, you saw everybody was like, oh, thank God I can go back to being my catch and shoot self, or I can go back to being this 3-and-D guy instead of doing all this creation. There was no like awkwardness there. So that I think is the difference between them and some of these other teams. I could actually see them as being a team that does, because they're so good. I could see them as being one of the teams that does get a higher seed. And then because of that, like they end up like getting to play some weaker teams and then making the conference finals anyway. But I also think they have the potential, if they're not one of like the top 3 or 4 seeds, to upset one of those upper seeds.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be an upset because I do think that in the West, maybe all but the Mavs, like the Northwest Division teams that we have in A tier, are all definitively better than the Grizzlies. The Mavs are a little bit closer, I think, if we were like parsing it. But I think there's always like there's some margin for error there.
If I was in the West as an NBA player, it was a luxury last season to not have to worry about them. And now they're back and you're going to be like, God, now I have to like scheme for this team too. And it's just another team. Desmond Bane is so good. Like people are going to remember him now that they have their people back. I could see them being the Mavs of last season, being the team that kind of surprises people. Not that they're going to make like a big mid-season trade, although maybe they could, but
they don't really do that. They're like a more stand pat, super guys kind of team.
They've just
mid-season
had really bad injury luck and other bad luck.
Right. We talked about at the top of the show that Gigi Jackson just got injured. Hopefully that's it for this season, right? For their sake. I'm sure like if Grizzlies fans, you need to be praying to the basketball gods and trying to atone for whatever it is that your team did to upset them to this degree.
Yeah, as a basketball fan and NBA fan, definitely should have Grizzlies on your radar. They could go to the finals. Anything can happen in this weird league. They got that young Zach Edey. Is it going to be a Derek Lively type story? We'll see.
I see that the other team that you have in this tier is also one that I share in the Cleveland Cavaliers. I just talked about like how I had previously like mentally been grouping the Grizzlies and the Cavs, right? Why do you have the Cavs in this tier, say, as opposed to an A tier?
I just think they're outclassed by the other teams. And I'm like, this, and it also is factored in that the Celtics just are in the East. So it's like, I have Celtics conference finals like lock. So it just like already shortens the amount of teams I can put in that's like maybe could make it. There's only going to be 2 teams. So I already have 3 East teams in this A tier. It's just like the Cavs are being pushed out. They're just like, I think they have more questions than the other teams, just schematic wise, not even like, oh, if they're healthy. Like I think there's
Which
fit.
they also struggled with throughout last season, but
They impressed in the playoffs in some games where I thought like they'd get swept or something, and they like fought back. So I think they're good, but they're not an A-tier team. They'd have to get lucky, kind of like the Pacers did last season, which we will get into them, because they'd have to be playing like a Bucks team where Giannis is hurt, or like, and then play another team where their main star's hurt, something like that.
which, yeah, like you said, the Pacers had that luck last
Yeah.
season. But this is why we have upset potential here, because I think we both agree that we don't believe in this team's formula. Which is a worse fit, the Mobley Allen front court or the Garland Mitchell backcourt?
I kind of think Mitchell and Garland.
Yeah, the fact that you have two ball dominant guards who seem to not know how to play off of each other well, to the point where this team was better when one of those guys was off the floor, particularly when it was Garland, because Donovan Mitchell was having like really an MVP caliber stretch for that within that first half of the season. But we were also, it was weird time to evaluate it, right? Because it was at the same time that Evan Mobley was out, so it was really the Mitchell Allen show. It is a weird formula. Unlike some of the other teams that I have in this tier, I don't really see this team. Like the rest of the teams I have here are teams where I'm like, I could see them exceeding an expectation based on their talent because of how they play.
Right.
But with the Cavs, they're so talented, not like a crazy amount. Like I think they have as much talent as, say, in terms of aggregate, like good players, as someone like the Knicks or the Bucks. But they have consistently underperformed that talent. And I think it's because of the fit, right? We'll see how Kenny Atkinson ends up using these players, right? They got a new coach. He was an assistant coach with the Warriors for a long time, and the Warriors do all kinds of weird shit. So maybe they'll figure out how to make these players work together. I think if they do upset one of the teams we have high above them, it's because they were a higher seed. They had home court advantage, and that's kind of the only way I see this happening. Okay, those are the only teams you have in this tier. I had the Sixers here. We already talked about them. The other team I had in this tier was the Indiana Pacers. And where did you have the Pacers, Will?
I have the Pacers in C, I think.
You have them as the mediocrity tier, the first round exit tier?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me try to make the case for them. They stood pat this offseason. We talked about they extended TJ McConnell. They also extended Obi Toppin. They extended Andrew Nembhard. Great deal also. Like, I need to figure out where these teams are finding these players with terrible agents. Andrew Nembhard. The other two are fine. The offense is going to be good. Like, they were the top offense in the NBA for most of the season before Halliburton got injured, basically. And then he was just a shell of himself after that. And it wasn't just like him not making shots, because he's not like a high volume shooter from anywhere on the floor, really. But there was just a bit more dynamism. They made the midseason trade for Pascal, and you're like, okay, things are just a little bit more clunky now, but you're looking at it and it's like, oh, they still ended up a top 5 offense. They were actually top 2 offense, even despite all of that. Pre-Pascal, they were 27th in defensive rating. Nasty. The Pacers were must-see TV because they were going to score a lot of points, and the other team was absolutely going to score a lot of points. They had that game versus the Hawks. It was like 149 or something to like 143 in the middle of the season. I think that was an in-season tournament game, actually. Post-Pascal, like I said, they ended up second in offensive rating overall. They were actually 22nd in defense. Still not good, but closer to 20 than 30. It's kind of like with the Mavs, right? Even though the Mavs were, I think, winning, maybe it was a comparable number of games when they were this like top offense, but like one of the worst defenses, is when your defense just tightens up a little bit. If you're like an above competent, like let's say 80th, 5th percentile offensive team, but you can tighten up the defense a little bit, you'll win a lot more games. And I think that because of that and how much headroom they have in terms of being a good road team, I need to double check their road record, but they lost a lot of really dumb road games down the stretch of the season. They're such a young team. I don't think anyone expected them, similar to the Orlando Magic, they expected them to be better than they were the year before, but they were a lot better. But then you see some of the same like indicators that you would expect from a young team. So this is another team where I'm like, I could see them because the offense is so good. If they improve the defense just slightly, they could win a lot of games, end up a top seed, get that home court advantage, and then it's anybody's game, especially because their offense is hard to scheme against because it is so dynamic. It's kind of random. They're constantly pushing pace. Like there's no like scheme that you can use defensively to break it. It's just like they're forcing you to just constantly be disciplined defensively, which does take a lot of energy. Even for the Boston Celtics, they did sweep them. I don't want to push any close sweep narratives, but the Pacers were scoring at will in that series, even in the games without Tyrese Halliburton, practically, and against an incredibly good defensive team in the Boston Celtics. So I think that matters. Like that showed me that like, okay, this offense seems legit, actually, even against like playoff level defense. So they need to get the other half of that formula down. But I could see them having a puncher's chance.
I think for all those reasons that you laid out, they could definitely still have a puncher's chance because there's all kinds of factors that go into them. And Siakam fitting in more. The defense is the big question because their offense is insane. Halliburton could be way better even than he already is and more consistent. I mean, there's all kinds of things that they can do. I put them in C because it was less about them and more about the rest of the East. Because I was like, damn, they got so lucky last year. Like they were playing the Bucks in the first round. They should have been eliminated.
Okay, here's my question for you, because this is how I approached this with the Pacers and also with some of the upper tier teams. Of the teams in the East, healthy, like assuming everybody's healthy, is there a team besides Boston where you're like, the Pacers have no chance of winning this series?
Yeah, I think the Sixers and I think the Bucks, if they're healthy. I think it's more of a toss-up right now for me with
We
the
saw
Knicks.
the Pacers go like 4-1 against the Bucks in the regular season, since we're talking about paying attention to the regular season. And the Bucks, they struggled with the Pacers like pace and all that because of their lack of athleticism.
That's true. Maybe that is like a bad matchup for them and it's a little more tough.
I'm just saying, I think offensively, like defensively, like they're gonna get wrecked, right? Unless I saw like massive improvement, and even if I saw them like tighten up things in the regular season, they're not gonna have like a scheme-proof playoff defense because they just don't have the personnel. So that's where I'm like, I think they still need a bit of luck. That's why they're in this tier and not the higher tier. Okay, yeah, the Sixers I think just wreck them because they don't have anybody to guard them. Although they did crush the other thing with the Pacers. I was thinking about if Philly had won that series against the Knicks, they were about to go up against the Pacers. And then Embiid also has to keep up with Indiana's pace.
And he was hobbled. I think the Pacers would have beat them.
He was, but there were games in the regular season as well where it's like he's just not getting up and down the floor.
But I was just saying, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. Even if he was healthy, maybe.
I think they create problems for each other. I do agree with you that the Sixers would probably prevail, but I wouldn't be like shocked, especially because I don't believe in the Sixers, if the Pacers were to like upset them in a series like that. So that's where I'm like, I don't totally write them off against anyone except Boston.
And the Knicks, they played them. The Knicks were injury riddled, and it went to 7 games.
Actually, if the Knicks were healthy, I'd probably
pick them too. Also, I just wasn't sure because of the iHeart thing. I don't know how the Knicks are going to be right now, and so I wouldn't like begrudge anyone who was like the Knicks are so much better, but I just don't know yet. But I'm fine leaving the Pacers in B. Like I'm not like so staunchly like they should be in C. I was just kind of like, I don't really see them beating these other teams unless they get really lucky, and they already did get really lucky. And I'm like, what are the chances that happens again?
It's interesting. So far, I have let you move Philly up to A, and you let me move the Pacers up to B. I wonder if we're going to move any teams down relative to each other. That was it for B tier. Not a lot, but there's upset potential. But the teams that are up here are basically the ones that, like, I would be shocked if anyone but these teams was in the conference finals.
Same.
Unless it's the first team that I have in C tier,
the Magic,
which is the Miami Heat.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the Magic.
I'd be shocked if the Magic made the conference
okay.
final. No, I'll just jump over to the Heat. They have Bam, they have Spo. Sometimes they have Jimmy. They're going to make the playoffs somehow, whether it's through the play-in or not. Some of these teams, if I see them making the playoffs only through the play-in. but the offense is terrible. Like it has been for years, ever since I think it was was it the bubble season when they were the 1 seed and they had a really good offense? Every year since then, they've been 20th or below in offensive efficiency.
Yeah,
And
and then they just turn it
it's
up.
getting worse. Exactly. Can they go further than a first round exit? Absolutely. It's the East. I see them as having, despite literally everyone else on the roster, because they have Bam and sometimes Jimmy, they can create a game breaking defense against any team, particularly in the East.
Yeah, I almost put them in D tier, but I think like they have such big expectations for themselves as an organization, and Bam is so good and he looked amazing in the Olympics. I was like, I got to put him in C, you know?
Yeah. And they're a top 5 defense, but their offense is so bad. Like that's the part that needs to, I guess, ray of hope that I will add here that will actually help them potentially defensively and offensively is that after watching Khalil Ware in Summer League, I'm like, oh, okay, this guy is actually good. And he might be skilled enough to play as a 4 next to Bam so that they have actual size in that starting lineup, potentially. Maybe he's coming off the bench, whatever it is. Or size next to Bam, or they have an actual backup center that's like playable because they have not had, instead of Kevin Love having to play backup center minutes at 37 years old or however old he is now, they might win more regular season games than they did last year. They had so many injuries last season. They didn't have, like, I think their most played lineups played less than like 100 minutes together because they constantly had guys in and out of the lineup. It may not matter that they have a higher seed though, because they were horrible on the at home last year. They were actually at a better road record than their home record. Like, I thought that these Miami Knights were supposed to take other teams by surprise, but I don't know if it's just like the fans or whatever it is. Like they need to show up more and give this team a bump because they need it.
Yeah, I think the days of heat culture, magic, voodoo are over and they need serious changes. And I think Jimmy's time may be coming to an end more rapidly than people think. That's kind of where I'm sitting. But I love Jimmy. I want him to keep doing good. I kind of I actually like the Heat a little bit, like honestly, just because I watched LeBron on the Heat, and I love LeBron. And I think it's fun when they're good because Spo is really cool. But yeah, I think C is the perfect spot for them. Let's go with the Clippers.
Okay, so they were actually the first one I had listed, but I wanted to transition using the Heat. That's good.
So the Clippers I have in C.
Tell us why they suck.
We talked, about their offseason, how it was one of the worst ones. I think they have to have a down year now. They don't have PG. Your team's better with PG for the most part, at least in this stage of his career, if your team isn't a total shit show outside of that. With Kawhi and him and what they were trying to do, and T. Lue and a front office and owner that's willing to go all in, they were put as favorites so many times.
They were the 1 seed at some point in the middle of the season,
and they
right?
had a really hot stretch. Everyone was super high on them.
It's actually funny because I think that the moment that Russ went down, like it was kind of post All-Star break, maybe a little bit before the All-Star break, like that's when they started tailing off. Because he brought so much energy to that team. They're not an unathletic team, but their most athletic guys aren't exactly spring chickens.
Yeah.
And they were just so sluggish. It was that they had the Grammy trip, right? Because when the Grammys are happening, they go on the longest road trip in the NBA because they can't use their building. So that trip is just there. And at the end of that trip, they won this like stupid back-to-back game against the Hawks. That was like, if you win this, like you really, it was just clear they just used all of their energy there. And then after that, they just had nothing left. And then obviously Kawhi gets like injured or has some mysterious knee soreness at the end of the season. So then you take that out of the lineup as well. It was just, but when they were good, they were as good as any team in the NBA, Boston Celtics included. They blew out the Celtics at one point in that stretch. So can I give you my case for why I think the Clippers will make the playoffs?
Okay. Yeah.
They have James Harden.
Mm-hmm.
But when he's played, I think ever since he started starting games, his team makes the playoffs every year. He plays a lot of regular season games. He runs a lot of pick and roll. They have a good offense. And then
Yeah.
they've got some good defensive pieces on that team, right? So it's like even if Kawhi misses time, they're still going to be playing coherent enough basketball to be winning, to not be like losing like every game kind of thing
Hmm.
if Kawhi misses time. And if Kawhi is healthy, like they could still be like good enough, you know? Like, and they have again Chris Dunn, they have
Hmm.
Zubac, who we talked about at the top of the show, who's been really great for them. He is playing lots of minutes now because Harden's on the team and using him in the offense, and Ty Lue has less excuses to go small. They did lose Mason Plumlee as a backup center and Daniel Tice, who went to the Pelicans. I actually don't know who their backup center is going to be now that I think of it. But I think they just have a solid enough team to win a good
Yeah.
number of regular season games, which might not be enough in today's West to make the playoffs outright. But this tier, I also have teams that I'm like, they could make it out of the play-in.
Well, it's like you got teams in the plan who are the 7, 8, and then you have the 9, 10. And
Yeah.
so I think I was seeing D as more 9, 10 teams. And
You think the Clippers are going to be a 9-10
no,
team?
I don't. That's what I'm saying is that's
Yeah.
why I didn't put them in D.
Yeah.
The next team I had was the Lakers in C.
I had the Lakers in D tier,
I thought about that too.
but I also had them as I noted that they're the best team in the D tier. So maybe this is the hater tax.
I don't know. I think they'll make an trade around the deadline of some kind, and it may not work, and they may be worse because of it. But I just know LeBron, and I know that he knows that the team's not good enough, and I'm like, he's not going to go the whole season with just like nothing happening.
That
And
happened last year.
but
And
they
they knew they
did get
weren't
to the
good enough last
playoffs.
year, too.
They did get to the playoffs though.
Through the play-in for the second year in a row.
Yeah, but they were the 7 seed.
They were the 8 seed.
No, because we
Yeah.
played them in the first round.
Because they beat the Pelicans in the play-in. So they would, so like if there was no play-in.
I know, but they ended as the 7, which is what
Well,
I care about.
sure, but
That's
okay,
what I
fine,
care about.
Fine.
And I was just saying C is kind of like the 7, 8 range, and 9, 10 is
Yeah.
more the D. And
That's
I think
fair.
80 was looking pretty good, and I believe he's going to have a good season.
You make a good point, and I do think that they're going to win probably a similar number of games as they won last year, but I don't think they're going to win more. Because AD and LeBron played a lot last season relative to their last few years, particularly AD. LeBron made, was it third team All NBA? And they still ended up a play-in team for the second consecutive year. So you say he was amazing in the Olympics. I thought he was pretty good last year too. It was just about that consistent effort, and he just doesn't have it on a night-to-night basis anymore.
Yeah.
And the same for AD, despite him not having quite the same age excuse. The reason I would move them, I would downgrade them relative to last season, even if I think they'll perform similarly, is that we now have, assuming health, the Memphis Grizzlies bumping everybody that was lower than them down, because I don't see the other teams as improving substantially. The Clippers had a lot more like room to be bumped down. Even if they lost PG, they did get worse, but they do still have Harden. They have those like things that you get boxes checked off for, like, this will be a good enough regular season team. The Lakers don't have that.
Right.
Austin Reeves, we saw a massive regression from him in the regular season compared to his previous year because he was given a bigger role. D'Angelo Russell is D'Angelo Russell. He's actually pretty good in the regular season most of the time, but he was a lot more inconsistent last year. And another summer of people talking about him. And they have all these players that are on the roster that accepted their player options and they couldn't trade them, so they didn't. And now it's like, are these guys going to play? Is Christian Wood going to play? Is Cam Reddish going to play? These guys were like integral parts of their rotation last year. How is JJ Redick going to do as a first-time head coach? Like, a large part of the job of a head coach is just like managing the regular season, and he's literally never had to do that before. So I think they have a lot more downside. So that's the only reason that I would put a team that otherwise, like, I agree with you. Like, I could see them eking their way into that 7-8 range in the play-in, but I could also see them being worse than they were last year, and they have no room to fall.
I think it depends on if they find some way to make some kind of roster improvement, because if they keep it the same, they're going to definitely be pushed down. I don't know that they will because their GM is an idiot. So, okay, I think I agree based on your points that it's D because they did have such a bad offseason. Like, it was terrible.
Really.
And with like the Grizzlies getting better, that is a very good point. And I even think the Rockets are going to be better too. So I think they'll be pushed down even more.
That's true, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they're better. The Rockets might end up being around what they were, but
Right.
we'll talk about them.
Well, let's go to the Rockets then, because I put them in C.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Oh
Because I
gosh.
just think they're
I
gonna
have to
be.
be like the bad guy again.
Hey, I believe in the Rockets. They're gonna. Although I know there's like this weird stuff with Şengün going on, and I don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes. But
You know what? The Warriors would kill to have Şengün right now.
for sure. I guess just because they kicked our ass last season, I feel like high on them, and they just need to like kind of get their shit together.
They were great at home, right? They were like a top 4 home team in the West last year. On the road, they were downright atrocious. They were like Utah Jazz level on the road. Worse than the Grizzlies on the road, but better than the Jazz. But again, a young team that showed them like massive improvement, but showed the hallmarks of like, okay, they're still a young team. There's still like some things they need to learn. They have a swap with OKC, and they're definitely gonna be having to give that up. So wait, top 10 protected, it looks like. So actually if they're like, we're not gonna be good enough to make the playoffs this year or play in,
tank.
they could
Damn,
tank
you're right.
to try to get that top 10.
So is
But we're
that
talking
really a
about this year.
purgatory thing, or is that like they got a plan?
It is a plan. I hate that we call this purgatory now because they're too young. They're the youngest team that I would have in the purgatory tier.
So to be fair, on our show notes for you listeners,
yeah,
we didn't say it was purgatory. We said it was more like a play-in. They make the playoffs if they're lucky, which is like the lower play-in teams who they win those play-in games and they get in.
Yeah.
Is that what the Rockets are?
I think that's what they are because I don't necessarily expect them to be a top 8 team.
We'll put them down there with the caveat that they're not in total purgatory, but
yeah, they're definitely not. They have so many options ahead of them, but they're like of the caliber of the purgatory teams.
It's the possibility that they will tank is what's convincing me right now.
Yeah. That's why I was like, wait, I have to make this last argument because So I got you to move another team down. I see that you have the Phoenix Suns in D tier, but I have them in C tier.
Whoa.
Is that right? You have the Phoenix Suns
I have the Suns in D.
You have the Suns in D tier. Okay. I want to make the C tier case for them because I don't want to be the bad guy, even though I hate the Phoenix Suns. They got swept in round 1 by the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are a substantially better team than them, regardless of the matchup advantages that I think the Phoenix Suns could have had in that series. They did not take advantage of those advantages. Forget that it was the Wolves. Phoenix had no ability to impose their matchup advantage at any point in that series. Like, they had no idea what they were doing. They didn't have a floor general. Nobody looked like they knew what they were doing, really, on both ends of the floor. They didn't know which things they were going to be targeting against the Wolves, whether they were trying to target anything on defense. Every time they did something that worked, they didn't go back to it. It was really annoying. I can't imagine being a fan of that team, like, truly. Now that they have Mike Budenholzer, who is not an offensively oriented coach himself, his teams have not been like super top offenses or anything with the Milwaukee Bucks, but they've been good enough and they've had decent shot profiles. The Phoenix Suns were actually a terrible shot profile team. They took so many mid-ranges, so few threes, so few rim attempts. Like, it wasn't that they at least took some rim attempts or like took a lot of threes along with the middies. It was just like, no, it's just middies. And they turned the ball over a ton. Now that they have Bud, now that they have a point guard, they're going to add, I think, some organization to an offense that already has a bunch of really talented jump shooters. So they'll have a higher floor offensively, and they can continue to raise the ceiling from there just because those guys are so talented. And then obviously having like Tyus Jones or Monte Morris are going to help reduce turnovers. But like, what is your argument for having them in D tier?
Okay, so when we first started doing this, just a quick little side, I put the Suns in the A tier, which is the which is the contenders, or the conference finals or bust.
Yeah.
Because I do think that that's what the Suns think. Like, HBO was like, everyone wants our roster. We got KD, we got Booker. They went all in.
They said that everyone wants their roster, but they also said that they were not planning on adding a point guard and taking the ball out of Book or KD's hands. And they added point guards. They added 3 point guards, actually. Between the standard contracts and the 2 ways.
I'm on the fence with Bud just because he was about to be fired if they didn't win the championship. He was like literally on the hot seat and was criticized a lot. I think some of that was overblown. I think he's a fine coach.
Well, he did get fired.
Eventually, yes. He's going to be better than Vogel was. So I think that's like an upgrade. I finally figured out why I'm so low on Tyus Jones. Because this was the shot chart in the series versus the Golden State Warriors the year that they won. When the last time the Warriors won the championship, this was Tyus Jones' shot chart
Nice.
in the series.
That's amazing.
And I remember watching this series and fucking being pissed at Tyus Jones because I was
because you hated the Warriors.
I was like, please beat the Warriors, please. And and everyone was like, he's the best backup point guard in the league this season. And I was like, he's doing terrible in this series. I don't remember the context necessarily as why he was so bad and couldn't make a literal shot, but I went and looked at his stats from the series and he was like minus 14 every game. But he had some games where he had like 9 rebounds and 8 assists and 7 points, which is like pretty good. That's what you want, like some assists and some rebounds. But like, my God, he could not shoot it. And I just don't believe in him. I'm pissed at him for this. It doesn't move me at all that they have him.
That I can use that to spin it in the Suns' favor. Because if Tyus ends up being that bad, then they'll stop starting him. And then they won't be as tiny as they've chosen to make themselves this season.
I mean, is that like the big debate going on, is whether they start him or if he comes off the bench or something? Oh, yeah, because he was like, I'm supposed to be a starter.
Apparently, Budenholzer promised him a starting job.
Right. Oh
and that's how they got him to sign there on a minimum.
I think that's going to be
Why else would he go to Phoenix?
Man, I just don't like the Suns. I think their defense is awful. I think Monte is on the end of his career.
Tyus a lot of Nuggets Twitter with that one.
There's a reason we traded him, okay? And it worked out very well.
That's getting clipped.
I just don't believe in the Suns. I put them in D for that reason, but I just think they're completely delusional. But I could make the same argument you made with the Lakers about like the Grizzlies being up there and then being pushed down and like
but the Suns were a 6 seed, so they could be like a 7 or 8 and then make it through the play-in. Like I could see that happening.
The Clippers being worse, like they could be above the Clippers. For the sake of our show and us agreeing on this official what's in a game tier list, I'll keep the Suns in there because it really is like me being super low on Tyus Jones. And there are a lot of smart analysts, including Matt Moore, who love Tyus Jones. And
lots of smart analysts are wrong. So.
I'm just like against him because of that series, because he really made me angry. So we'll leave him in C. I had them in A. And then I moved them to D. So we'll meet in the middle at C.
All right. Let's go to your last C tier team, Will. The Orlando Magic.
Oh, the Magic.
Which was actually also in C tier for me.
I just think they're a fun team. And I like Jalen Suggs. And he's going to be better. I think Franz is going to be better. I think Paolo's going to be better. They're just like a young team, and they have KCP, and he's a veteran, and I like the mixture of championship veteran comes into the young team and doesn't allow bullshit.
I think we both agree that they're going to be as good or better than they were last year, particularly offensively. It's hard to get worse than they were. I made a joke last episode that was like, maybe they might get worse on offense, but it's really hard to be worse than they were given the talent they have. There are definitely worse offensive teams, but given the talent they have, because they just turned the ball over so goddamn much and could not make a 3-point shot. We both agree they'll be better, and yet we both think that they're going to make the playoffs, be a first-round exit. Again, that's what they were last year. And actually, of the kinds of first-round exits that you could be, they had the best kind, which was like made it to Game 7, right? Even though they gave up a massive lead in Game 7.
Yeah, I just think they're going to be on the lower end of the seeding, and the top 4 teams are they're going to beat them.
I actually don't know that they'll be on the lower end of seeding. Like I could actually see them sneaking into the top 4 in seeding, but then getting upset by one of those other teams.
Yeah, that could be too. I just think either way, whoever they're matching up in the first, I just don't see them winning in a 7-game series.
I think the offense just needs too much, and they didn't really address it in terms of playmaking and point guard play. Maybe Paolo just takes a massive leap just on his own. But I do think that it would have helped to just get him some guidance by having a point guard there. Like that was one of the things that I really wanted for that team. It's not necessarily having like a Tyus Jones that wants to play all the time, although I wouldn't have minded them getting Tyus Jones either, but just a veteran point guard who could help guide these guys and improve their offensive game by just helping them like see the floor differently, advice that they're giving them like when they're on the bench, like all this stuff, like what are you seeing when the game's going on? And they don't really have that on the team anymore. They at least had like a Joe Ingles before, even Markelle Fultz before, who wasn't really like a great point guard.
I mean, KCP played with the best 2 point guards in the league in LeBron and Jokic.
He's not a point guard himself.
Hey, the coaches should be able to coach up Paolo, man. Let's just trust Paolo that he's going to figure it out, and he has coaches who can develop him.
Why would I trust a 21-year-old to just figure it out?
Hey, LeBron did
You
it.
don't do that. He's not LeBron.
He was a number 1 overall pick.
Okay, you guys, you heard it here first, folks. Will Jones just said Paolo Banchero could be as good as LeBron James.
They're a similar archetype in a way. You know, obviously not the same freakish athleticism that LeBron had, not the Swiss Army knife of LeBron.
He's bigger than LeBron.
Anyway.
LeBron's a freak. But anyway, Paolo Banchero. I do expect him to make some kind of leap. I think he's going to cut out a little bit of those really bad shots from his shot diet and just improve the efficiency. Like that alone would tick the offense up like a point per 100 possessions, which would be massive. Franz needs to improve his shooting, and it's hard to get worse than he was last year, especially considering where his baseline, should be. I do think that the only way to go is up for this offense, but I don't think it's going to improve by the margin that it should to bring them past a team that I expect to win a first-round series. And if the offense doesn't get better, you're just relying on the defense more to carry you through the regular season. And they were able to do that last year. They ended up, I think, third in defense after the Timberwolves and the Celtics. It's a lot of energy to rely on your defense throughout the entirety of an 82-game regular season. So that's why I want the offense to improve, get a top seed, give yourself a little bit of a better chance. Because they were crushing the Cavs in those home games. But whenever they played on the road, they just couldn't get it together. And even in that game 7, they went up, but they weren't able to keep that lead. So love them to bits, but maybe they'll make a move midseason. Who knows? The teams we have not talked about from mine are the Kings. Okay, so they were a play-in team last year, and everyone is mostly healthy. They had some end-of-season bumps and bruises with Kevin Huerter being out first, and then Malik Monk, I think, injured his shoulder. But they were in the play-in range even before those guys went out, so there was no massive drop-off. Then they got DeMar DeRozan, traded Harrison Barnes for him. He should help them in the regular season some, right? There were a lot of clutch games where it's the offense is super, not stagnant, but really sloppy right now. So they would go on these big runs and then give up equally large runs and then end up in clutch games that they shouldn't really be in, frankly, but then lose in the clutch. And DeMar, I think he was second in Clutch Player of the Year voting last year, so maybe he'd help with them. The Clippers and Warriors got worse. We talked about that, how that means that the Pacific Division overall is worse. And they play those teams the most of any teams in the NBA. So they're going to have more opportunities against teams that got worse this year. So they should at least be able to be a top 2 team in their division because they always beat the Lakers anyway, right? There's this whole thing where AD can't beat Sabonis. Why do you think a team that just traded for DeMar DeRozan is going to be worse than C tier?
I just think, the West is tough. The Kings didn't even make the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
And this was they make the playoffs. I guess D tier is play-in. They make the play-in, and they could make the playoffs if they were lucky, which is what I think. That's what I think the Kings will be. They'll be in the play-in, and the only way they'll get in is if they're lucky. But I guess I don't know. I just don't know how good DeMar is going to make them or not. I kind of was thinking they're a wash.
I know how good DeMar is, but you're right. I don't know how good he's going to make them.
Yeah, so I was just sense, I'm still just kind of lower on the Kings. And the Kings beat the Warriors in the 9-10 and then lost to the Pelicans for the 8th seed.
Yeah, because they've been getting beat up in that matchup all year. They just can't handle any team that has real interior size, except the Nuggets, apparently, because they just get really lazy on defense whenever they play the Kings for some reason. I just think they're going to be a little bit better than they were last year. And it's more about like you said, you're paying attention to the number of playoff spots, but I'm more saying there's a range and there's a number of teams that that are fighting for those spots.
I'm just trying to fight against what I always say I hate with pundits who are sneaky good. They could go on a run. They can make the playoffs. I'm trying to choose against the team, and I'm trying to be look, the Pelicans and Kings do not have it. And I don't think they're going to do it unless they get lucky.
Keegan Murray could also take another, leap. He's been really good defensively. They got a lot better defensively after Keon Ellis was starting in place of Kevin Huerter when he got injured. He might have a shooting regression season himself, Kevin Huerter. Like, I don't see a lot of downside for this team.
I don't think I can accept the Lakers being D, but the Pelicans and Kings being C. I feel like those are like
Yeah,
very similar. Like the Lakers
that's
finished higher
fair.
than both of them. And I
In
think
the
the Lakers are
play-in,
better
yeah,
than both
but
of them.
regular season, whatever. The Pelicans did also make moves. We're about to talk about them in a second, but I'm gonna let you put the Kings in D, especially if they don't make the playoffs this year because they have Sabonis locked up. They're probably going to extend Fox soon, and then they just signed DeMar as well. And they're just kind of like locked into like what they are at the moment, and with no indication of like where it is they're supposed to go, even though like everyone has ideas of maybe what they should do, but they just don't know. So they don't have enough information, right? They have that one playoff series versus the Warriors last year in the last how many 21 years it's been? That I think I'm thinking more about the team expectation for this particular example because it's like
Okay.
they went out and got DeMar DeRozan. So
Yeah.
they're the front office should expect this team to make
I think
the
that's
playoffs.
true. That's definitely true. And I was going more on like I don't think they will,
Right.
kind of a thing. But I could
Right.
be really wrong, and DeMar could really improve them, and they could be an 8 seed or 7
Yeah.
seed easily.
Or even 6. Like, you just never know with these Pacific Division teams because they play each other so much.
Okay, I'll put them in C because I do think the DeMar thing.
I don't think I think you make a good argument though that they shouldn't be higher than the Lakers because I think that the Lakers are the best team that I listed in D, and I don't think the Kings are better than them.
That's where it gets weird.
Even though the Kings always beat them
Unless
head to head.
you could argue DeMar does make them better than the Lakers, though.
I think they're the same.
Okay.
All right, last team that I have in C is the Pelicans, and you had the Pelicans in D. Is that right?
Yeah, it was essentially the same kind of reasonings of the Kings. I mean, they like got smacked in the playoffs, and I was so fucking pissed at them.
Okay, so they're a weird ass team. I'm not here to argue that they are normal. I was actually thinking that you'd have me bump them up because they won 49 games last year. Again, like there's this like range of seeding where there's like 3 seeds and then like 6 teams fighting for those spots. And I kind of see the Pelicans as there. And for a time last season, they lost a couple of clutch games down the stretch, but any one of them would have bumped them up into being a top 4 seed and having home court in the first round. But they lost, and then they ended up like losing that momentum at the end, and then they just kind of stayed in that play-in range. They did lose the play-in game to the Lakers, but they were the 7 seed in that game. They had home court advantage, and they almost won that game before, at like in a crazy like would have been a wild comeback before Zion got injured in the last like 3 minutes of that game. It was crazy. Like they had taken the lead after like a massive run by Zion. I think that my bottom line for this team is just like if this team is healthy, Zion first and foremost, I could actually see them as a team that could make the conference finals. Like I wouldn't be shocked by it. I wouldn't pick it because I think I have too many questions about their scheme and like how everything fits. But they have enough talent to do it. They just got DeJounte Murray. It is a DeJounte CJ backcourt though, which is like defensively, but maybe CJ starts coming off the bench more and they play Trey Murphy more in the starting lineup, or maybe they miraculously find a trade for Brandon Ingram. But I just see a lot of defensive potential for this team. Herb Jones made them a top 5 defense last year. I don't know that losing Valanciunas helps him overall defensively, but I can see the arguments for it. Even though they get worse rebounding, they don't have to put like he won't be guarding any more pick and rolls, right? They can switch more things. True. They might give more run to Yves Missi, who I don't know, maybe he's a shot blocker. I don't know enough. He's a very athletic prospect, but he adds to more of their offensive questions for this team too. So it's just like they're a weird team, but they've had so much talent for so many years that you can't help but think, I mean, this is not a purgatory team.
If Zion is healthy, and I knew he was going to be available for the playoffs because he's never been that. That's what's so hard for me.
Well, they have to make the playoffs first. They actually did it this year. My thing is, I can't have the Pelicans lower than the Magic. I think they're similar. I think they're similar tier.
But they're in a different conference, which is why I'm more comfortable putting the Magic in C. I mean, the Lakers still beat the Pelicans in the play-in.
You are like obsessed with the Lakers, Will.
I know. I just like don't think the Pelicans are that good, and I know
The
it's
other,
not that good of an argument, but I'm just like,
yeah,
it's
the other like
Pelicans.
argument against them is that they lost Najee Marshall, who was
Mhm.
a really versatile defensive piece for them, and they traded away Dyson Daniels, who was another versatile defensive piece for them off the bench.
They're in this weird space right now, and they could figure it out this season, and then get out of this weird space.
Okay, so I'll just try one more thing. The Lakers wanted to get DeJounte Murray. Everyone was like, DeJounte Murray would solve all the Lakers' problems. They would finally have an athletic backcourt player who could play both sides of the ball. LeBron wouldn't have to worry about ball handling as much or having to play next to D'Lo, all of this stuff. However, the Pelicans got DeJounte Murray. And they had some of the similar issues, but they were just like lacking in shot creation overall. How does he play with the rest of those guys who all of them are better with the ball in their hands? CJ McCollum actually plays off ball quite well. You know, he'll move around. But the other guys, not so much. And maybe DeJounte, like if CJ starts coming off the bench, I could see their defense being better with DeJounte playing point than shooting guard next to CJ, all this stuff. And they were already a pretty good defense last year. They were top 5. They were actually the team that kept the Nuggets out of the top 5. We were pretty close to the Pelicans.
Well, right now we only have 6 teams in the A through C.
So we need a team.
I think we should pick one of the Kings and or Pelicans to go up and C, whoever you're higher on.
I'd pick the Pelicans because they beat the Kings and they're better.
All right, we'll put them up there then.
I think Zion is the best player of anyone on both those teams. And that's kind of what it comes down to.
It's funny, like I think of the West as like from top to bottom so good, and now I'm like not seeing as many West teams in this like higher tiers. I don't know if it's because I really like the top 4 in the West.
It's because they're
or what,
amazing.
But, well,
like I said, I could have been convinced to move the Pelicans up to upset potential. And the reason that I have that there is that I could see them getting like a top 4 seed. Like I can visualize that happening because it almost happened last year. And like the margins are so small in the West that there's just multiple teams fighting for so few spots.
Because like the Pelicans and Kings are likely to face each other in the play-in like they were last year, I do want to put them in different tiers at least.
Well, we just got through 4.5 of our tiers. We'll talk more about D tier on the next installment, where we talk about some of the teams that aren't tanking, but maybe should be tanking, and the teams that are outright tanking because they want to capture the flag, the lottery hopefuls.
Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and hit the subscribe button and hit the like button on YouTube. And please leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music, wherever you're listening to this, because it would help us out so much and we need all the support we can get. Go to our Clips channel too. Every so often we'll upload stuff. This is a very long form show, as you know, so we love you types of people who enjoy that. But we try and find the little snippets that we can to put it in bite-sized clips. Yeah, we love you in YouTube and in Serbia and the United States or whatever it is you're watching. And just remember, winning is fun and losing sucks.
Unless you're tanking for Flagg.
Yeah, because then losing's fun.